Jeff's got a little, some pictures on the screen. And the second one says keep calm and do what's reasonable and necessary. So when people get confused about, well, what can I do to defend myself? How can I stay within the boundaries of the law? Basically, the answer to that is you can do what's reasonable and necessary. So in New South Wales, we know that from our Crimes Act. So our Crimes Act basically tells us when we're confronted by people, we can act to defend ourselves, another person, so your children, your husband, your wife, family members, friends, strangers, or your property. And you can do everything that's reasonable and necessary in those circumstances to defend yourself, your property, your loved ones. And you can do that in circumstances as you see them. So our audience today is female, and so of course it would be a different perspective if you're female than if you're male. So normally if you're confronted by a male, typically you might be lighter, you may be weaker, you may be less physical. These are some of the things which the courts will take into account if you go to defend yourself. So you're confronted by a male. The type of threat from the male would dictate what type of response you can give. So we often talk about the escalation of violence. We've done some videos on the escalation of violence. The more threatening the initial approach is from the other person, the more up the scale your response to that person can be. So does that make sense? Okay, so if somebody comes to you originally with, say, a verbal insult or a verbal threat, it's very hard to explain that your actions are reasonable and necessary if you then physically go and punch the person in the face or stab them or do something to hit them with a hammer or harm them. But by the same token, if that person comes to you and they start pushing you around, they threaten to assault you or hurt you, and they start that process and you find a weapon or an implement that's incidental around the area, you can use that to defend yourself, and then it would be very easy to explain that your actions were reasonable and necessary in the circumstances as you perceive them. Some of the things which we would take into account in court, if you come to court, is your personal characteristics. So gender will make some difference, as we've touched on, but so will other things like size and weight. So you'll often hear people cross-examined in court about how tall they are, how much they weigh, things like that. Because what the advocate is trying to do is compare you to their client and make out that you're a lot more physically assertive and capable and dominant than their client. That's what we're trying to do. So in this top photo, there is a gender difference, but it would appear that the female would, on face value, appear to be physically dominant. So there's some of the things which they would look at. The other things, weapons. Now, there's been a lot in the media lately about weapons. In New South Wales, we're not allowed to carry weapons to defend ourselves. So if you're going out for a walk at night, you're not supposed to take, some mace with you or a knife or whatever, and just so happens someone attacks you and you stab them. You're going to have a lot of trouble explaining that. You probably end up getting charged with carrying an offensive implement or a prohibited weapon or something like that. But, for example, if you are in your kitchen and you're cutting something up and a home invader comes in your home, under those circumstances, there's implements there, and would be reasonable you could seize those implements and use them to defend yourself. So that's one of the other issues. There's a photograph of Chris Brown. So sometimes of the person that's attacking you would also be part of the argument whether it's reasonable or necessary. So if there's somebody with a reputation for beating people up, he's a local thug, he has a criminal history, perhaps he's attacked you before, then it's a lot easier for you to explain that your actions are reasonable and necessary, because that's something that would be obvious to you. This person's violent. And in courts, probably back 10, 15 years ago, there's a lot of cases going through and they related to what we call battered wife syndrome. So it'd be like a husband, typically, or a de facto partner, and over a period of years he would beat this female up, and ultimately she would snap and think, I've had enough, he would show the signs that he was going to attack her, and then she would respond. And in court we would argue that she was defending herself. So your relationship with that person can also be important. And also, I suppose, reputation. I think Mike Tyson there threatened to eat somebody's kids or something.
Verbal threats.
Yeah, verbal threats. So, I mean, when people are constantly saying to you, you know, I'm going to beat you up, I'm going to hurt you, I'm going to injure you, or whatever over a period of time, that would also be important in that relationship. So the key things to remember in self-defense is reasonable, necessary in the circumstances. So there's three key words, and we just give them their ordinary meaning: reasonable, necessary in the circumstances. So you can't really run across the road to attack a person and then say you had to do that. It's got to be approximate, proportionate. The person's got to be confronting you. There's really got to be not much of another option. And then if all those things are in place and you do any of the techniques that you're going to be trained tonight, then you'd be on some pretty safe ground. So it's a complicated area of law, but that's the simple version of it.